I'm sure many of you have been wondering where I've been all of this time. Well, not really, because nobody actually watches my videos, because my opinions don't matter in any way, shape, or form, and I can't even pretend that they do anymore. But I will nonetheless say I was just involved with a violent counter-revolution involving Donald Trump and the alt-right, and I was helping the Russians with the WikiLeaks. Never mind. I was on a very fun vacation to Greece. Yes, and that was a lot of fun. But I thought it would now be nice to go back to something very lighthearted. Not that a vacation to Greece isn't lighthearted or that I've been involved in dangerous stuff recently. I thought it would be nice to go back to animated movies. I want to deal with Lilo and Stitch. I don't really specifically want to review the entire movie. I mean, it's, in my opinion, a great movie, and I've seen that many people like it. It got a very positive reception, especially for a post-Lion King Disney movie, and I think that it was totally deserved, but I wanted to focus on a very specific aspect of the movie and kind of give my own take on it. You know, it's fun to interpret art and to try to read subtext into it, or to discover subtext in it, just as long as it doesn't get too pretentious. I'm looking at you, 2001. So I thought it would be interesting to deal with a topic that's very controversial, but that I think could be fun to discuss. Child abuse! Isn't that a fun subject to discuss? No? Okay, well, it's an interesting subject to discuss. I have a very interesting theory about Lilo and Stitch. Now, I hope nobody was offended by the joke. It's just that I know that sometimes it is easier to get over abuse if you deal with it by humor and optimism. Now, you might be wondering how I know how to deal with child abuse. Well, moving on. The Nostalgia Critic commented on how the most interesting aspect of the film is clearly the relationship between Lilo and Nani, and I completely agree. I think that that's really what makes the film powerful and extremely deep and unique for a Disney movie. Obviously, it's a story about, a main character, child, having lost their parents, but interestingly enough, this time, it's losing both of your parents, not just either your mother or your father. And not only that, as the Nostalgia Critic commented on, there's not even an evil stepmother or anything. It's a very realistic, believable relationship where the much older sister takes care of the very young sister, and I thought that was very original and very heartwarming, and I agree with everything that the Nostalgia Critic said about it. But what I find very interesting is that because it so realistically depicts families led by the eldest sibling, I think that it would be interesting to delve even deeper into such family relationships. Because what I think is very interesting is that sometimes kids' movies obviously include subtext that's rather subtle and hidden because you can't really show it explicitly because of censorship stuff, but they can still very maturely talk about a topic. And no, I don't mean the whole Legend of Korra stuff where you show two girls holding hands and you then think you've made a big breakthrough actually showing a lesbian romance. No, I think something much more complex and, well, something more really tied into, the themes of the film, not something that's tagged on at the end. What do I mean? Well, I think that the relationship between Lilo and Nani is very heartwarming, and I think they really care about one another, and I think Nani was a pretty good mother, for lack of a better term, surrogate mother for Lilo, and you can clearly see they really care about each other, really love each other. But a lot of people always seem to think that child abuse only takes place in very cruel, loveless families, and that the only people who ever abuse the children they take care of are completely cruel, mean-spirited monsters. And obviously, child abuse is wrong, and personally I also think, that smacking children or spanking them is probably wrong, and most cultures nowadays seem to think so, although just a few years ago, that was a much hotter debated topic where a lot of parents defended hitting their children. But so what I think is interesting is that I know that sometimes parents can, in times of crisis or stress when they're very emotional, hit their children without it meaning that they don't love them anymore. Now, you might once again be wondering how I know that. Anyhow, I think that even though Nani clearly really loves Lilo and Lilo clearly loves her, I think it's kind of implied actually, and not just implied, I think there's a lot of evidence in favor of this, that because obviously of how, broken their family is in the beginning, for lack of a better word, I hope nobody considers that term offensive, I think that it's very much possible that Nani might have sometimes hit or in other ways physically abused Lilo, because obviously they kind of show, them fighting very much and also yelling at each other and getting even kind of hysterical, yelling into pillows and that sort of stuff. And those are very typical behavior for broken families when they get into big arguments and when basically the emotions get too much. Once again, this is just, this is what my friends told me, anonymous friends. But another important indicator is obviously the fact that Lilo herself tends to get pretty violent. The fact that Lilo also immediately runs from Nani as soon as Agent Cobra has left her house. The fact that she even hides from Nani in the washing machine. And also the fact that Nani is even used to this and even knows where Lilo is used to hiding. Also the fact that she very violently pulls her arm, which is often how physical abuse kind of starts, with just violent pulling or just mild threats. The fact that Lilo seems to be so scared of her. Even in the second movie, she immediately runs away from her when she has been out past her bedtime. All of these are very typical behavior for children who've been abused. So that's why I thought they were kind of subtly convey ideas through their stories. And Lilo also tells Agent Cobra that she was getting disciplined. She seems to say this because Nani is signing to her from behind Agent Cobra, and that also seems to be the reason why she says 5 times a day, but she seems by herself to say that she also gets hit with a pillowcase. She even says that kind of sentence, so that joke seemed to be the way of them to convey this idea without saying it explicitly because of censorship reasons, especially because right after that we have that whole part where Lilo hides from Nani, and also where she tries to get out of her grip and uses her spit to gross Nani out. All of that I thought was very indicative of typical behavior of children who are being abused. So that's why I thought that they were kind of trying to subtly imply that. And obviously you don't have to adhere to my interpretation of it, and if you consider it to be too dark, I can totally understand that. And I hope I haven't ruined the movie for you with this. Probably not, because I can't ruin anything for anyone. And I hope nobody considers this theory to be offensive. And I hope I haven't offended any abuse victims with this either. And if I have, then I in advance want to apologize, because I'm a total wuss and I don't like to be controversial, even though I pretend that I'm a big hipster. I just personally consider it to be very refreshing that it's possible that a children's animated film actually discussed child abuse in a mature and realistic manner, and showed that sometimes child abuse can take place even in very loving families where people care about one another, but where there's just a lot of stress and problems facing the family that sometimes cause messed up behavior, but that sometimes this does just eventually go away and things get better, and that it isn't always this completely abusive cycle of violence where the only way to get out of it is to immediately call the authorities. Sometimes abuse isn't this terrible pure hatred and sadism, and not all abuse is equal in severity. And I hope I don't offend anyone by saying that, but that's why I thought that this was a more realistic, downplayed portrayal of it. So I'm curious about the opinions of other people in this regard, and yeah, I've got nothing more to say. Bye!